Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I wanted to talk to you guys for just a few minutes about the video I did yesterday on barbell rows. There was a lot of confusion, a lot of questions, because there's a lot of different ways that people do barbell rows out there. And for those asking, please stop telling me which lifts you would like to see, because I'm going to eventually get to every single popular lift. So every single lift that people have already listed is already on my to-do list. It's just a matter of me getting the time to do each one and to formulate which points I want to bring up when addressing the form issues. And obviously any lift you guys have ever seen me do, I will cover at some point. Now, some people were asking a lot of questions about the pulling to the chest versus the stomach and how much it works the lats, and I think people aren't understanding how different muscles come into play here, because the barbell row is not a lat exercise, it is a back exercise that happens to be lat dominant. And when we start talking about pulling points, just look at the basic thing of pulling to the stomach versus pulling to the chest, and you're going to notice something when I stand up here. When I take a bar and I go to where I can pull it to my chest, I'm upright right about here. You've got to be bent slightly lower. To pull to the stomach, it will naturally pull you up more, and you'll notice that my scapula come up going to the stomach more. And the reason that's significant is because it changes the emphasis of the movement. The reason a lot of you say, well, I can do a little more weight that way, is because one, you are shortening the range of motion. You're still getting the stretch at the bottom, but the peak contraction of the lats, you're actually moving the barbell a couple inches less at the top, which is the peak contraction for the lats where they're contracted, so you're getting the stretch, but you're skipping the peak contraction because you're hitting the stomach instead. And so what you're doing is, even with a heavier load, you may be working a heavier load through the stronger range of motion on the lats, but you're skipping the weak range of motion where the lats have to contract harder at the top. And the other thing is that it brings your scapula up. And if the scapula rise, which muscles do that? It's not your lats, it's your trapezius. And the trapezius is a very, very strong muscle, pound for pound. It can produce a lot more force, particularly for its motion because of the way it's inserted, than a lot of other muscles can. It can move more weight. And what happens is that you're transferring a large amount of the weight to the traps. In fact, the traps are heavily involved in at least 14 or 15 different common movements, and people aren't aware of that. They will jump in and take over anytime they're given a chance. And what you're doing is, at the top of the movement, which should be the hardest part, instead of your lats handling most of the load, you're letting your traps handle most of the load. And so what you're doing is you're robbing your lats of a little bit at the top, even though you're using a heavier weight. Now, you'll still probably get good lat development because of the heavier weight, even though you're turning it into a partial for them. But what you're doing is you're letting the traps take the work, and then you're shortchanging a lot of the other muscles of the back. And this is kind of the type of reasons you see a lot of guys who do end up a pretty decent lat development, who have that very flat back look. They don't have a full three-dimensional back because things like the middle or their lower traps, their thoracic erectors or spinal erectors or rhomboids or rear delts, all these different muscles end up being a little underdeveloped sometimes for them, and it doesn't give them that big, thick back. They'll have a wide back but not a thick back. And doing your rows like that, for example, is one of the reasons. If you don't deadlift and you do your rows a little too upright and turn them almost into shrugs, which is what pulling to the stomach will do for a lot of guys, so you're doing rows that don't work all of those smaller muscles, and you're relying purely on the rows to the stomach and chin-ups, that's how you're going to develop that wide back that is kind of flat and doesn't have that thickness that you're looking for from a lot of those smaller muscles being maximally developed. And a lot of those smaller muscles get developed through things like doing the rows that way, or the way I do them with a Pendlay row, combined with things like deadlifts that build up all the erectors and things correctly. So the way I have people doing the rows is very much there for more complete back development. And the way a lot of the other guys are doing the rows, they could be doing the same thing with a T-bar row, but using even more weight. Because if you look at that, if you're doing the barbell row that way, you're really simulating kind of the T-bar row. You're getting the stretch at the bottom, but it's letting you bring the traps in a lot more. And so it's probably better for overall trap development and forearm development because you're pulling the heavier weight, unless you're strapped up. But you're not necessarily building up all of the erectors and the rhomboids and a lot of the other smaller muscles you're trying to work, because you're letting the traps take most of the load. So it's just a matter of how you're balancing your program. But the reason that I have the rows in there the way that I do is that I've already got shrugs. I've already got all these other movements in there. I've got chin up, shrugs, everything else. So what I'm focusing on is trying to make sure that the person gets complete back development top to bottom. And that is the reason I have them focusing on the type of rows that I have them focusing on, to make sure that their back is fully developed, because that is usually the weak point you see in a lot of intermediates, is things like lower body in general or overall back development. And so people who finish my novice program are not going to have the traditional weaknesses that you see in intermediate level bodybuilders. Alright guys, so that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it has been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time. But let me give you guys a bicep shot before I go.